In this lesson, we will be discussing what it means to be an animal. From the last lesson, you accomplished a general survey of the 6 kingdoms of life. You researched archaebacteria, eubacteria, protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. And you should have gotten a general idea for how these kingdoms are different from each other. In zoology, we study kingdom Animalia. Zo is Greek for animal, and ology is Greek for study of. So zoology is literally the study of animals. If I were to ask you to name an animal, I can almost guess what type of animal you would name. Maybe you thought of a cat, maybe a dog, or maybe a cow or some other type of farm animal. But animal life on Earth is vastly different than just mammals. Cats, dogs, cows, and a lot of other farm animals are mammals. But again, animal life on Earth is vastly diverse, and there are so many types of animals that are very different from mammals, but are still classified as animals. Snakes are animals, frogs are animals, spiders are animals, and so are insects. Now these 4 may seem obvious, but what about a sea star or a starfish? They are animals. They look completely different from mammals or from you and me, but they are animals. And these creatures down in the bottom right corner are sponges. They are animals as well. And so what unites all of these examples of animals? Well, that brings us to the definition of what an animal is. An animal is a multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotrophic organism whose cells lack cell walls. All animals perform 7 essential functions: feeding, respiration, circulation, excretion, response, movement, and reproduction. So that definition may be a little overwhelming, and you may not be familiar with all of the terms in the definition. So let's go through this definition term by term and discuss what it means to be an animal. All animals are multicellular. That means their bodies are composed of more than one cell. Here on the right-hand side, we have a picture depicting several different types of cells in humans: blood cells, nerve cells, reproductive cells. And so humans, we are a conglomeration of billions of cells. Here on the left-hand side, this is a diagram of a sponge. Sponges are animals, they're multicellular, and each of these cells performs a different function. The next term is eukaryotic. And eukaryotic means that the cells have a nucleus that contain the DNA. In this image right here, we have a bacteria cell. Bacteria cells are prokaryotic, meaning they don't have a nucleus. So the DNA just floats around throughout the entire cell. But in animal cells and other eukaryotic cells, the DNA is enclosed in a nucleus. So all animals have eukaryotic cells, meaning the DNA is enclosed in a nucleus. Our next term is heterotrophic. Heterotrophic means the organisms need to eat to obtain energy and nutrients. They cannot make their own food. So, a good example of a heterotrophic organism is us. We have to eat to get energy and nutrients. The opposite of a heterotroph is an autotroph, and plants are autotrophic. They can make their own food using the energy from the sunlight. But all animals need to eat to obtain energy and nutrients. They need some way to obtain the food and to digest it. Animal cells do not have cell walls. Plants do have cell walls. The cell walls are rigid structures on the outside of cells that give plants structure and support. And the cell walls on plants are what makes plants crunchy. Like when you bite into a carrot, the cell wall is what's making that crunching sound when you break through the cell wall. All right, so now we're going to be moving on to the 7 survival characteristics. These are 7 tasks that all animals must perform to survive. So you'll often hear me throughout the rest of the lessons and on quizzes and tests when I refer to the 7 survival characteristics. These are what I'm referring to. And the first one is feeding. At its simplest, feeding means obtain and digest food. So all animals need a way to obtain and digest food. This may look like what humans do with an extensive digestive system. We obtain food. We go to the store, but back in hundreds of thousands of years ago, we hunted it or we gathered it. So we obtain food and then we digest it with our extensive digestive system. But it may not. Our first few animal phyla don't have digestive systems at all, but they still feed. They still obtain and digest food. So this is our first animal we'll be discussing, the sponge. It does not have a way to obtain food like with hands, like say you and I would, but it does obtain food by filtering water through its body, and it digests it intracellularly, and we'll talk more about what that means in the next lesson. But this sponge, even though it doesn't have a digestive system like you or me, it still obtains and digests food. Okay, the second survival characteristic that all animals need to do to survive is respiration. Respiration means to exchange gases, carbon dioxide out, and oxygen in. So in humans, we have lungs that do this for us. But in our example of the sponge, it has a body wall that exchanges gases for it. So the carbon dioxide leaves its cells and goes into the water, and the oxygen in the water comes into the cells. So the sponge uses water for respiration. It doesn't have any lungs, but it still gets carbon dioxide out and oxygen in. The third survival characteristic that all animals need to do to survive is circulation. At its simplest, circulation means to transport nutrients, oxygen, and waste to and from cells. This does not always involve blood. Some animals use water to accomplish this. And again, our example on the bottom is the sponge. The sponge does not have blood. If you cut it, it would not bleed. It uses water, the water surrounding it, to transport nutrients, oxygen, and waste. The next survival characteristic that all animals need to accomplish is excretion. And excretion means to get rid of waste. Our cells produce ammonia as a waste product, and it's poisonous to our cells. And when I say our cells, I mean all animals. All animals produce ammonia as a byproduct of cellular activity. And so we have to get it out of our cells. Some animals have groups of cells that pump water out of the body, like the sponge, while others have complex organs and systems like our kidneys. So all animals get rid of waste. Some use water, some use organs. The next survival characteristic that all animals accomplish is response. And response means to react to the environment using specialized cells called nerve nets. Here's an example of a hydra. It'll be our second phylum we talk about. These purple spidery looking things represent nerves. And hydra have nerves scattered throughout their body that help them react to their environment. In humans, we have a big conglomeration of nerve cells called a brain with a spinal cord and then nerves stretching throughout the body. But both of these animals, no matter how complex or how simple, use these nerve cells to react to their environment. All animals respond. The next survival characteristic that all animals accomplish is movement. This means to transport themselves. Hopefully that's pretty obvious. All animals move. This may occur, however, only in the immature embryo stage, or it may occur throughout life. So our sponge that we've talked about briefly, it is sessile, meaning it doesn't move as an adult. But here, when it's an immature larva, the larva can swim, and so that's when it moves in its life as an immature larva. So we count that. That's a form of movement. They transported themselves during some time of their life. even if they're sessile as an adult. So all animals move. The last survival characteristic that all animals accomplish is reproduction. And this means to make progeny or offspring. And it can be accomplished one of two ways, asexually or sexually. Asexual reproduction only requires one organism, and the organism is basically making a clone of itself. So here we have a hydra. It's began a little bud, and the bud keeps growing and growing until it becomes a full-fledged hydra and breaks off. Reproduction can also occur sexually. So here we have a mouse and another mouse, and all of a sudden we have lots of mice. So all animals reproduce. So that's our definition of what an animal is. And now you can move on to the next lesson.